Boris Johnson didn't get all the big calls right. My name is Mike Cashman, the channel is Britannia Waves the Rules. Do subscribe if you enjoy the videos. Boris Johnson did not get all the big calls right, and we should stop believing that he did just because it's frequently treated out. The evidence does not support this. He actually got most of them substantially and disastrously wrong. Not all, I do want to be fair, but mostly. Let's start with ABC, Afghanistan, Brexit, COVID. Afghanistan, his government managed to ignore the very obvious warning signs. We were very well aware, even from the Trump days, that America was going to withdraw. The risk analysis got handed to Dominic Raab in select committee by Tom Tugendhat, and Dominic Raab didn't even recognise it. Now, this isn't to take away from the excellent work by the British military in doing what they could at the last moment, but the evacuation should have been planned long beforehand. Right, let's go on to Brexit. He's credited with the brilliant negotiation of a Brexit deal. I've dealt with that in another Brexit fallacy video. But in terms of the withdrawal agreement, if you call that an achievement, most of the work was actually done by Theresa May. Boris Johnson made it worse in certain aspects, and he changed the Northern Ireland arrangements specifically to an arrangement which he himself had said would never be acceptable. He lied about it, and he now tells us that it doesn't work. So quite apart from the adverse economic impact, that's a fairly substantial instance of getting the big calls wrong. And following Brexit, on COVID, please look at his Greenwich speech on 3rd of February 2020, when Boris Johnson said that the effect of coronavirus on Brexit Britain was it was going to be positive for Britain by Britain not shutting down when other countries did. So that was his attitude going into bat. Britain locked down too late. Thousands of people died that didn't need to. Now, you may say, well, he was doing his best, but hey, remember the title of this. The point was not was he doing his best, which, by the way, he wasn't. He could have gone to the Cobra meetings and better informed himself. But the title of the video was he got the big calls right. He very definitely didn't in that case. He claimed to have put a protective ring around care homes. It was a lie. And one of the worst aspects of the British response to the coronavirus was that the priority of the Tory government was to enrich their cronies with fast-track VIP contracts for PPE and other supplies. Their priority was to enrich their cronies rather than to look after public health. That's such an appalling dereliction of duty, and I cannot understand why there was not more public outcry about it. Obviously, there has been about Partygate, and I think that's because people are more personally affected when they've seen relatives die that they couldn't be with. But the crony contracts were themselves a dreadful example of getting the big calls wrong. And the inclination to look after your cronies, what about the £37 billion? That's an incredible amount of money entrusted to the wife of the Conservative MP John Penrose, Dido Harding, who had a dreadful track record anyway, as far as operational management of the organisations that she'd been involved with, chiefly Talk Talk. Once again, what about actually prioritising public health? Now, this is where we can recognise one exception. Everybody recognises that the UK vaccine rollout was certainly creditable, and credit should be given to Kate Bingham, who was also a fast-track appointee, and in this case a sensible one. She did have a lot of detailed knowledge about vaccines. There was a lot of money put into it. There was research by scientists working on this actually in January 2020, before the government were on alert for the problem. But the vaccine rollout overall, of course, it owes very much to the armies of volunteers, to the NHS, to the military who stepped up. I wouldn't deny any of that, but if we are criticising Boris Johnson for what happened that was negative on his watch, then let's also recognise the vaccine rollout was a positive. Not a benefit of Brexit, as it's often been talked about, because everything we did with the vaccine could have been done as a member of the European Union, and in fact we were in the transition period at the time. We also have the Delta onwards wave of coronavirus, and I mention this lest anybody accuse me of hindsight, because in May 2021, as the UK was gradually going through a series of unlockings, too fast in my view, then as the first cases of Delta, or B1617 as it was called at the time, were emerging, then commentary from 10 Downing Street at that time was there are very few cases, with the implication that that didn't need to result in major changes to the plan. Now, I cite this because in May 2021, I was first caller 1 week on Any Answers, making the point that the number of cases is not the issue, it's the rate at which they're multiplying. And there were hotspots at the time, Bolton, Blackburn, Bedford, they all seem to start with B. And I was urging more specific action in those areas. The government didn't take note of what I and other people were saying. They unlocked too soon, perhaps driven by the Euros. I know there was 1 4-week delay, but it wasn't enough. And look at the results. For many months, we were running at 1,000 coronavirus deaths per week. Those are the government statistics. We've actually only fairly recently come down below that number. If the lockdown, or if the unlocking had been pushed back until a point where the vaccine rollout had proceeded much further, then we could have been in a very different situation. We could have been working with infections at a much lower level, and there would have been fewer deaths. So on coronavirus, lockdowns, got the calls wrong. Furlough scheme was good for the employed, not so much for the self-employed, but it did do some good. Test and trace, a disaster. Vaccines, yes, that was positive, but we didn't make the best advantage of it. Crony contracts, appalling. But what else if we move beyond ABC? So social care. On the steps of Downing Street, Boris Johnson said, we already have a plan for dealing with the long-term problem of social care. And at the same time, or in the same time period, he was saying, and we have no need to put up taxes to do so. So what happened to that? That completely disappeared. Levelling up, it's become a joke. The money that has been doled out has largely been doled out in order to give preference to Tory constituencies or areas where the Tories want to have positive influence. You know, Richmond in North Yorkshire, Rishi Sunak's constituency, has been a beneficiary of supposedly levelling up funds. Those who live in Richmond, a lovely place, but I think they would recognise it's not amongst the most deprived. Was it Jenrick and his associate who signed off funds for each other's constituencies? So levelling up has certainly been a bit of a disaster. The economy as a whole, Britain is in a worse economic mess than it has been in for probably decades. And remember, the claim was not he's doing his best. The claim was he's got the big calls right. Well, he hasn't on the economy. Now, Ukraine, again, this is one of the areas that's cited. Over the years, Tory policy with Russia has been dreadful, has been to fraternise with Russians, Boris Johnson particularly, to favour them, give encouragement to Putin, encourage his meddling in the UK democracy. When the invasion actually and perhaps inevitably occurred, then Britain's help for Ukraine has been positive. Hopefully any UK politician would have done the same. Boris Johnson has. Of course, when he goes to Kiev, Zelensky is a master of looking after his stakeholders and giving each of them the message that they most want to hear. Not with any sense of deceit. It's genuine, but it's targeted, and Boris Johnson, of course, loves it. He looks like he prefers to be on the streets of Kiev than on the streets in the UK. And then, finally, what about the culture that the Prime Minister has brought in? And I would say that's a fairly big call. And it's a culture of law breaking on the international stage and in the local area. So the most fined address in the UK for law breaking during coronavirus is 10 Downing Street. Boris Johnson is in charge there. He should know what's going on, at least when he's on the premises. The claim that he didn't know anything about what was going on is ridiculous, partly because he was at many of the events. He lied about it in Parliament. That is actually a pretty big call. So no, Boris Johnson didn't get the big calls right. He got most of them wrong. And it's time to deal with the fact that we have somebody as Prime Minister who is lacking in morals, but also lacking in the competence of government. I'm Mike Cashman. Please subscribe to the channel. Britannia waves the rules.